Welcome back to the deep dive. We are diving into the sources you shared with us today on one of the most profound and, frankly, most confusing aspects of human experience,
Yeah.
the concept of the self. Okay, let's unpack this. If you spend 5 minutes scrolling online, reading a self-help book, or talking to a mentor, you will inevitably hear the advice, the simple mandate, just be yourself.
It's everywhere.
It is. But when you genuinely try to follow that instruction, it quickly unravels. Which self are they talking about?
Right. Because the you that shows up in a high-stakes work meeting is just fundamentally different from the you that's joking around with your oldest friends.
Completely different. We know from sheer experience that the persona we bring to a negotiation is completely different from the goofy, nostalgic self we are when sitting around a campfire. We contain multitudes.
And this isn't just about external roles, playing a part. The sources point out that we experience constant internal friction.
Oh, absolutely. A deep-seated part of us might crave financial security and quiet comfort, yet another voice, just as loud, pushes us toward ambitious risks and sudden career pivots.
Exactly. And the difficulty only compounds when you look back chronologically. The core values, the fierce desires, and the deep-seated fears that defined you 10 years ago might feel completely foreign today.
So that simple advice, be yourself, it actually creates an immediate existential contradiction.
It does. And the sources you provided force us to confront this paradox head-on. Are we striving to uncover a single, hidden, immutable, true self, an authentic I that remains fixed beneath all the surface changes? Or are we, in reality, a fluid collection of dynamic identities and subpersonalities that shift, evolve, and often conflict, depending entirely on the context we find ourselves in?
That tension is the core intellectual battle that has defined philosophy, psychology, and spiritual traditions for centuries. We are looking for an anchor, a fixed point of authenticity. But the experience of being human is navigating a complex, ever-changing ocean.
And the mission of this deep dive is to synthesize those competing views so you, the listener, can gain a structured understanding of your own inner experience.
Because this is not just an abstract puzzle.
Not at all. How we choose to answer this question, fixed essence or fluid multiplicity, fundamentally dictates how we approach personal growth, moral decision-making, and perhaps most practically, how we resolve inner conflict when we feel pulled in opposing directions.
Okay, so let's start with the comfort and the simplicity offered by the true self idea. The true self framework is incredibly compelling, mostly because it addresses our fundamental human need for coherence and meaning. It offers the promise of a unified identity, a final state of arrival.
It's a very neat package.
It is. This view posits that deep down beneath all the noise, the surface moves, the temporary roles we adopt, and the social masks we wear to be acceptable, there's a profound, authentic, and whole I that exists.
A core that doesn't change.
Exactly. And the sources were very specific about what this true self typically consists of. It's not just personality traits or your current preferences.
No, it's much deeper. It encapsulates our deepest non-negotiable values. The things we feel we cannot, must not compromise on without, losing a piece of our soul.
Right. And it also holds our most honest foundational desires. Not the fleeting want for a new phone the marketing created, but the deep foundational desires related to purpose, connection, legacy.
And crucially, the true self is seen as the repository of our unique gifts and our personal calling. It's the intrinsic knowledge of who we are when we are definitively not performing or pretending for anyone else.
It's like the original blueprint.
That's a great way to put it. Untainted by fear or social pressure, just residing deep within.
What's fascinating here is how universal this search for a core identity is, regardless of culture. The philosophical and spiritual traditions have developed highly specialized language for this core.
Which really underscores its immense cultural strength and enduring power. In classical philosophy and Western religion, we see terms like the soul or the heart.
And traveling east, the sources point to the concept of Atman in Hindu traditions, the individual soul or self regarded as eternal and central to the cycle of existence.
Right, or in monotheistic traditions, it is often referred to as the image of God, suggesting an innate sacred quality that cannot be corrupted by external events.
Or, in more secular terms, the higher self, or authentic self.
All these names point to the same thing, a core identity that is supposed to transcend the temporary, anxious, and changing ego.
So let's analyze the immense psychological appeal of this. Why do we gravitate toward this idea of a true self?
Well, the first reason, and it's a powerful one, is the promise of inner coherence.
The inner coherence, so like a solid foundation in the middle of a storm.
Precisely. In a world that constantly demands flexibility and role changes, The idea that there is a fixed, real me I can eventually discover and align with is enormously grounding.
It suggests that even if my job changes, my relationships shift, or my circumstances flip upside down.
Your fundamental identity remains whole. It's still there, untouched.
That's a huge comfort. And that coherence, I assume, provides the next benefit.
Yes, crucial guidance. If I have a true self, I have a fixed moral and existential compass. It simplifies the agony of difficult choices.
So when you're faced with a crisis, should I leave this city? Should I end this relationship? Should I pursue this difficult new project? You have a North Star.
Exactly. You can try to simplify the decision down to the question, does this action fit my true self? Does it align with who I really am? Or is it a distraction driven by fear? It gives you an immovable foundation to stand on.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Coherence, guidance. What's the third strength?
The third major strength, which is perhaps the most profound psychological comfort, is the promise of dignity.
Dignity. How so?
The true self assures us that we are more than our mistakes, our roles, or the external labels others impose on us.
So your worth isn't tied to your performance.
Precisely. If I fail spectacularly at a business venture, or if I am unjustly maligned by others, the true self, the core essence, remains untainted, whole, and worthy. My worth is based on my essence.
Not on what I do or what people say about me. That's a powerful psychological shield against the harshness of life.
It is.
That is extremely persuasive. That framework offers structure, meaning, and resilience. But, and there's always a but, isn't there?
Here is.
This brings us to the transition and the critical challenge that the sources insist we face. How do we actually identify this true self?
Yes. If it is hidden beneath the layers of performance and roles, how do you confidently distinguish that genuine, authentic core from, say, a deeply ingrained cultural script?
Or a potent desire born of early trauma?
Right.
What if the thing we think is our true self, say, the drive to be a lone artist, is actually a reaction to an inability to connect with people?
That's the core question the sources push us to ask. Is there truly a stable, unchanging core, or is this concept, despite its profound comfort, simply a highly effective, well-constructed narrative?
A story we tell ourselves.
A story designed to manage our anxiety about change, responsibility, and the terrifying complexity of life.
And that comfort, that immobility of the anchor, that's precisely where the opposing camps find their footing, right? If the self is fixed, then it struggles to adapt.
And adaptation is survival.
That critique leads us directly to the counterargument. The perspective that suggests we are not a single, unified entity, but rather a flexible collection of highly specialized, context-dependent selves.
Or parts, as some of the psychological models call them. Parts that surface based on the immediate environmental demand.
This model feels immediately intuitive because it describes our daily lived experience so accurately.
It does. We are simply too complex to fit one fixed definition. And the sources provide excellent concrete examples of these contextual selves.
Let's walk through some. Think about it. You have the professional, self-articulate, formal, goal-oriented, probably using business jargon you would never use at home.
Definitely. Then you have the playful self that only emerges when you are with close, trusted friends who share a history and whose judgment you don't fear.
Right. And then there's the dutiful self, perhaps activated when you visit aging parents or deal with sibling issues, carrying the weight of family history and obligation.
And often we see the emergence of the lover self, distinct from the friend self, involving vulnerability, deep trust, and physical intimacy.
These shifts are so profound that they can feel like toggling between entirely different personalities.
It can. And the most important examples are the challenging parts. When stress spikes or conflict flares.
The angry or righteous self suddenly takes the wheel.
Yes, expressing emotions and needs that the composed, measured self would never permit. We also have the dreamer self, the contemplative, future-oriented self that lives in possibility, far removed from the constraints of immediate reality and responsibility.
And in the last few decades, psychology has developed extensive, non-metaphorical terminology for this, right?
It has. We move into discussing subpersonalities or inner parts. These are often internalized roles and scripts we absorbed not just from our culture, but critically from our family system.
So the role we were assigned, or the role we had to create for emotional survival.
Exactly. And they become semi-autonomous, sometimes demanding entities within our psyche.
And the analysis of inner conflict that stems from this view is incredibly powerful. If you operate on the fixed true self model, inner conflict, say, wanting to quit your job and wanting to stay for the security, feels like
A personal moral failure, a lack of will, or a defect in your character.
Right. But if you embrace the many-selves model, inner conflict is reframed entirely.
It becomes a negotiation issue. The problem is not the multiplicity of selves. The sources argue that multiplicity is simply a feature of being a complex human being.
So the problem arises when these parts fail to communicate.
Precisely. Or when one part dominates the others, or critically, when one part is actively repressed, forced into hiding, or disowned.
Can you give an example of that?
Of course, we might have an ambitious part that drives success, a fearful part that provides necessary caution, and an injured part that carries historical pain from past failures. If the ambitious part refuses to listen to the fearful part's warnings, you burn out. Or if the hurt part is ignored and never healed, those repressed parts become problematic.
How do they become problematic?
They express themselves through panic attacks, chronic resentment, or passive aggression. They're trying to get your attention.
So the strengths of embracing this idea of multiplicity are obvious. First, it just fits. It aligns with the sheer complexity of our existence.
To function in a hyper-complex world, we must be flexible and capable of adopting different modes. It's an advantage.
Second, and most compassionately, it encourages a profound degree of self-compassion, doesn't it?
It really does. When we identify a fearful part or a highly critical part, we don't judge the entire self as defective.
Instead, we treat that specific part with curiosity and kindness, asking what it needs to feel safe or what job it is trying to do for the larger system.
But this leaves us with the ultimate question, the one that prevents this model from becoming just moral chaos.
If we are simply many, who is the real one?
Exactly. If I can be the thoughtful academic on Monday, the reckless adventurer on Tuesday, and the dutiful caregiver on Wednesday, is there any core identity that holds the ticket?
Is there a CEO of me, Inc.?
That's the question. If we are merely a temporary shifting coalition of roles, making decisions moment to moment based on the loudest voice, what happens to personal responsibility? We need to know who is coordinating these parts.
And that difficult question is why we must now turn to the philosophical traditions that laid the groundwork for these two opposing views. Here's where it gets really interesting, because these psychological models, the fixed self and the fluid self, are built on radically opposing philosophical foundations about what a person is, fundamentally.
We're moving from description to prescription, from what is to what ought to be.
We begin with the essentialist view, which is the philosophical bedrock of that true self idea we started with.
Right. Essentialism is the core belief that everything, including human beings, possesses a fixed, unchanging essence or nature.
So our task in life is not to invent meaning,
but to realize, awaken, or live up to that pre-existing essence. It is the notion of an immutable blueprint given at birth.
This view dominates classical philosophy, religious thought, and the concept of natural law, right?
Absolutely. Thinkers like Plato posited that the highest form of the self lay in aligning with reason, which was the essential divine part of humanity. If you believe this, then the true self is inherently rational, moral, or spiritual.
So living well, according to this view, means aligning with this nature, cultivating virtue, and resisting the parts of the self, the passions, the fleeting desires that distract you from your core definition.
The true self is the part reflecting this core essence. You are born with a definition, and authenticity is the measure of how closely you match that definition, not how creatively you invent yourself.
It offers immense stability. It grounds human value in an objective, fixed reality.
It does. But then we hit the dramatic pushback, primarily from 20th century movements.
Known as the existentialist view.
Yes. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre argued vehemently against the idea of a pre-given essence. For the existentialists, the core doctrine is that existence precedes essence.
What does that mean in practice? That sounds very academic.
It is, but the implication is profoundly practical. It means you are thrown into the world first, your existence, as a blank slate, and you only define yourself, create your essence, through your radical freedom, your actions, and your choices over time.
So, there is no true self waiting inside you. No fixed blueprint to uncover.
According to them, no, none at all.
This stance redefines authenticity entirely then.
Completely. Authenticity is not discovery. It is the honest act of taking full responsibility for the self you're actively creating. You are the sum of your deeds, your choices, and your commitments.
So if you choose cowardice repeatedly, you are a coward. If you choose courage, you are courageous. It is not something you were born with.
Precisely. And the existential critique of the fixed true self is exceptionally sharp. They argue that the idea of a fixed true self can become a massive form of bad faith.
Bad faith, like lying to yourself.
Exactly. A way of lying to yourself about your freedom. Think of the common excuse, I can't change, this is just who I am.
That's existential bad faith. You're denying your freedom to choose differently.
You're treating yourself like a rock, which has a fixed essence, instead of a human who is defined by freedom.
I'm struggling with that idea. If we are a project, doesn't that radical freedom feel more like terrifying aimlessness than true authenticity?
It can, absolutely.
If there's no fixed reference point, how do you decide what is a good choice? Don't the sources worry that this perspective leads to complete moral relativism?
That is the precise anxiety that existentialism identifies and demands we face. The sources confirm that this view is deeply unsettling, which is why people often retreat to the comfort of essentialism.
So how do they answer the question?
They argue that while it removes objective fixed meaning, it places the entire burden and glory of meaning creation on the individual. You decide what a good choice is by consciously choosing a set of values and committing to them.
So if you commit to empathy, that is your chosen essence.
That is your project. The lack of a fixed self is not empty chaos, it's radical responsibility. The immense impact of this view is that if you are not a finished essence, you are an ongoing, limitless project,
Which supports endless growth and change.
but comes with the heavy psychological burden of freedom. You are defined only by your last choice, and the next one is always yours alone.
It seems like the true self provides the comfort of meaning but risks rigidity, while the project self provides the freedom to change but risks aimlessness.
That's the fundamental tension.
The mind prefers structure, even if it's restrictive. That internal conflict clearly drove the development of practical models in psychology, which try to find a way to honor both the fixed and the flexible.
What's fascinating here is how practical psychology views the self not as a fixed object or as random chaos, but as a system that requires skillful management.
And so the job of authenticity shifts from discovery to what?
To integration and coordination.
Okay, let's start with the big one. Jungian concepts. The sources mentioned Carl Jung.
Yes. Jung provided a revolutionary language for understanding this inner architecture. He spoke of the persona, which is our social mask.
The functional identity we present to the world, which is necessary for societal interaction.
Right. But the crucial term is the shadow. This is the collection of repressed, denied, or disowned traits, desires, and aspects of ourselves that we deem unacceptable.
Usually because they clash with the persona we were trying to project.
Exactly. If I strive to be always peaceful and kind of virtuous persona, my natural aggression and selfishness get shoved into the shadow.
And this is where the balance comes in.
Yeah.
The sources highlight that an overdeveloped, socially acceptable persona necessarily creates a disproportionately large and often rebellious shadow.
That's the psychic equation. If I am the perfect, buttoned-up corporate executive, my repressed desire for creative freedom or recklessness grows stronger in the dark.
So what's the goal in Jungian terms?
The major task is individuation. This is the lifelong process of becoming a whole, unique individual by consciously encountering and integrating those rejected parts, the shadow, into consciousness.
So the goal is not to eliminate the persona.
No, not at all, but to recognize it as a tool and to bring the shadow out of the dark so its energy can be channeled consciously rather than acting out anonymously and destructively.
Moving forward to more contemporary approaches, the sources brought up internal family systems, or IFS.
The very popular model right now.
It takes the many-selves idea literally, treating the psyche as a system of interacting parts, protector parts, wounded child parts, critical parts.
Managers, firefighters.
Yeah.
Yes. In the IFS model, inner conflict is diagnosed as parts being forced into extreme roles.
Can you give an example?
A perfectionist part might be working overtime to protect a vulnerable part that fears failure and rejection. The therapeutic goal is not to abolish the perfectionist part.
But to help it release its burden, to let it know the system is safe.
Exactly. And here is the key insight for our deep dive. IFS posits a core, calm, wise, capital S self.
And the self is not a part.
Correct. It's a resource of curiosity, compassion, clarity, connection, courage, and calmness, the famous 8 C's. The self is the coordinating agent, the CEO.
So authenticity, in this view, means allowing this core self, which is universally available, to lead the internal system.
Offering compassion to the competing parts and restoring harmony. This provides the stability of the true self idea without the rigidity, because the self is always compassionate and always willing to listen to the complexity of the parts.
That's a powerful way to bridge the gap. The self acts as the conductor, managing the orchestra of our different parts. Now, if we turn to spiritual integration, we see the same pattern, don't we?
We do. Many spiritual traditions draw a fundamental distinction between the true self and the false self.
The true self, in this context, transcends the ego. It is aligned with universal principles.
Profound wisdom, radical compassion, profound stillness, or connection to the divine. It is often described as spacious and quiet.
Conversely, the false self is universally described as the self built of ego, fear, social conditioning, and attachment.
It is the self obsessed with image, external validation, and defense. The sources show us this distinction in broad strokes. Christian mystics speaking of the false self built around pride and anxiety versus the true self hidden with God.
Or Buddhist thought differentiating between the conditioned, anxious ego and the deeper, non-dual awareness.
The functional distinction is key. The false self is always restless, anxious, defensive, and focused entirely on image and performance. It's the self that demands to be right.
Well, the true self, when accessed, is characterized by spaciousness, grounding, and connection. It is the self that responds with wisdom, rather than reacting out of fear.
But we must include the crucial warning from serious spiritual teachers, though.
Which is?
The intense desire to have a special, superior true self, a uniquely enlightened identity, can become the ultimate ego project.
Ah, so you just build a new, fancier mask, a spiritual mask.
Precisely. If I use spiritual concepts to define myself as better than others, or as uniquely enlightened, I've just created a new, reinforced, and harder to spot false self that uses spiritual language to justify its arrogance.
So the journey is not about inventing a new spiritual identity,
but about the difficult work of letting go of illusions and opening honestly to the reality of one's own imperfections.
It sounds like whether you are a Jungian therapist or a spiritual seeker, the path is similar. Acknowledge the masks and embrace the complexity. But if we fail to do that integration, if we cling too tightly to one extreme or the other, we run into specific and dangerous psychological traps. Now we analyze the real-world risks associated with clinging too tightly to either the fixed essence or the extreme multiplicity model. These aren't just theoretical dangers. They actively block growth and cause suffering.
They do. Let's start with the severe dangers of a rigid true self.
The first major trap is fixing yourself in stone, which uses the ideal of essence to block change. The phrase, "this is just me, I can't change."
It's not self-acceptance. It's a profound resistance to growth.
This rigidity is particularly devastating when it comes to major life transitions, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a listener who built their entire identity around being a corporate lawyer. It's their true self. When they experience burnout and desperately need a career change, that fixed identity becomes an internal jailer.
They can't pursue painting or teaching because that doesn't fit who I am, even if the new path aligns with their current vitality.
It excuses stagnation and often cruelty. If my true self is impulsive, I don't work on self-control. I just declare my lack of control to be authentic.
The second and profoundly critical danger, which we mentioned earlier with Jung, is excluding real parts, the shadow.
Yes. If your true self-ideal is narrowly defined, always calm, always selfless, never sexual, never angry, you immediately repress all those natural, vital human traits that don't fit the curated image.
And the sources make it clear that repression does not equal elimination.
Never. The rejected parts, the healthy ambition, the fear, the normal anger, are shoved into the shadow. When they finally act out, they do so from the dark.
Often in exaggerated, ugly, and uncontrollable ways.
Leading to unexpected outbursts, self-sabotage, or moral hypocrisy. The more perfect the self-image, the darker the shadow must become to hold the rejected material.
Okay, so that's the danger on one side. Conversely, we must address the dangers of no self, anything goes.
The extreme existentialist position taken to an unmanaged psychological level. While embracing multiplicity is healthy, if there's no deeper center, the consequences are psychologically debilitating.
First, it leads directly to fragmentation.
Yes. You feel perpetually without a core, an anchor, or a sense of continuity. You become merely a succession of moods, environments, or other people's expectations.
Making it hard to commit to any long-term goal.
The listener feels like a kaleidoscope constantly being shaken. There's no stable pattern.
And crucially, this lack of core leads to shallow commitments and moral drift.
It has to. If every part of me is equally valid and ephemeral, why should I stick to a difficult commitment, a challenging relationship, a long-term goal, or a moral principle when the bored part or the fleeing part is loud today?
Taking responsibility becomes difficult because every regrettable action can be dismissed.
Exactly. That was just a temporary, stressed-out version of me, not the real me.
which is the ultimate pitfall.
It is. While we acknowledge multiplicity, we must still have a center of continuity that takes responsibility for all the parts, even the regrettable ones. We are multiple and flexible, yes, but we are not random or empty.
So if we jettison the true self completely, we risk jettisoning our ability to form persistent moral character.
There must still be core values, observable patterns, and a sense of continuity that persists, even if it's dynamic.
So if the true self is too rigid and the many-selves is too fragmented, the goal is clear. We need a model that honors complexity while maintaining stability and responsibility.
This brings us to the integration point, the functional middle path.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most psychologically mature and functional view is what the sources describe as the middle path.
It's a path that accepts the fluidity of multiplicity but insists on the emergence of a continuous functional center.
We define this center not as a fixed hidden object, but as a dynamic center of gravity that emerges, strengthens, and evolves over time.
It is not something you find prepackaged, it is something you build through consistent effort.
That distinction is key. A fixed essence is a marble deep inside. A center of gravity is more like a mature tree. It started small, it adapted to storms, it has grown.
But it has one central trunk that holds the whole system together, even as its branches change.
So what actually forms this center of gravity?
It is formed by our most deeply chosen values and our fundamental repeated commitments. It's not just what we say we value.
But the observable repeated patterns of caring, acting, and responding that we exhibit consistently, especially under pressure.
Yes, if you constantly choose integrity over expedience, that choice contributes gravitational mass to the integrity core of yourself.
And if you repeatedly choose vulnerability over defensive withdrawal, your commitment to connection becomes part of that stable center.
It is not predetermined. It is forged.
The nature of this center of gravity is complex then. It is not fixed from birth.
A baby has potential, but no developed character. But it is also not random or arbitrary.
It is dynamically shaped by a combination of fixed elements,
Our innate temperament and biology,
historical elements,
our culture and personal history.
and, most importantly, our continuous conscious choices, which give the center its coherence and direction.
That's the active ingredient.
Therefore, the true self-definition shifts entirely in this mature sense. It is not a hidden, perfect object waiting to be unearthed.
It is a stable, integrated, and deeply responsible pattern that emerges as we honestly coordinate and manage our many selves.
It is the capacity to function as the conductor of the orchestra, rather than merely one of the instruments.
And this mature definition of authenticity requires continuous work. It means consistently listening to all our different inner parts, even the messy shadow parts.
It means recognizing which impulses, whether they originate from fear, ambition, or love, align with our most deeply chosen values.
And finally, authenticity involves consciously choosing again and again the kind of person we are actively becoming.
It converts the self from an immutable identity into a conscious work in progress.
It allows us to evolve without losing responsibility for the evolution itself. Hashtag 7 practical questions for the listener, applying the knowledge.
This synthesis provides the structure we need, but now we shift entirely to the practical application for you, the listener.
Right. We want to use the tension between the true self and the many selves, not as an abstract puzzle to solve, but as a direct, actionable tool for self-knowledge and personal growth.
By approaching these reflection prompts with genuine curiosity, you can start mapping your own inner system and identifying the gravitational center you are currently building, whether consciously or unconsciously.
We have 4 essential reflection prompts from the sources that we urge you to sit with this week.
First prompt: when do I feel most honest and alive? What am I doing? With whom?
This question is deceptively simple. It bypasses what you think you should be and instead focuses on what gives you vitality.
So if you feel most alive when you are working on a complex technical problem alone, that reveals a foundational need for intellectual mastery, regardless of what career role you currently hold.
Or if you feel most honest and alive when you are in profound service to others, that points to an intrinsic value of compassion. This prompt is the essentialist reflection. It gives you hints about your innate energetic core.
Okay, second prompt: which parts of me do I hide because I think they're not acceptable?
This is direct shadow work. Be precise. What are the specific emotions? Shame, intense dependency, raw ambition, or justified anger that you systematically repress because they clash with your idealized self-image?
With your persona.
Yes. Identifying these hidden parts is the first crucial step toward integration. Remember, if they are hidden, they control you. Naming them brings them into the light where they can be managed by the compassionate self instead of sabotaging your life from the subconscious.
Very powerful. Third prompt.
Yeah.
What values do I want to stand by, even as I change?
This is the critical self-defining question. Values are the foundation of your center of gravity. Everything else, your career, your hobbies, your location, is changeable.
But which fundamental commitments do you choose to remain immutable?
If you choose honesty, what does that look like when it's inconvenient? If you choose courage, what is the action you take this week that reflects that? These are the chosen commitments that give you the continuity needed to navigate multiplicity without fragmentation.
And the last one. And fourth prompt. If I imagine myself in 10 years, which aspects of my current self do I hope will grow and which will gently fall away?
This question embraces the existentialist truth. The self is a continuous project. We are not just describing who we are today, we are actively choosing who we are becoming.
You are projecting your will onto your future self.
By identifying the parts you want to cultivate, patience, generosity, skill, and the parts you want to gently shed, obsessive worries, petty jealousies, defensive habits, you begin to consciously shape the trajectory and gravitational pull of your core self.
These investigative tools bypass the need for a final metaphysical answer about whether the true self exists. They simply help you use the creative tension between the fixed and the flexible self for profound self-knowledge and forward responsible momentum. #8. Outro.
To synthesize the journey, we've established that the sources show a clear tension. Some traditions mandate finding the single spiritual core or soul. Others, particularly existentialism, demand that we embrace our freedom and emphasize being multiple and actively self-creating through relentless choice.
And psychology attempts to bridge this by stressing the systematic integration of inner parts, the shadow, the persona, the wounded parts, all led by a conscious, compassionate self.
Furthermore, all serious paths offer a caution. The danger of clinging to a false self built on ego and performance versus the potential for dignity found in integration.
So what does this all mean for daily practical life? The mature view we landed on tells us that whether you call your integrated state a true self or a well-integrated set of selves, the work itself is remarkably similar.
Regardless of the label you use.
Right. The actual difficult work is to face yourself honestly. All the parts, not just the flattering ones.
It means integrating your shadows rather than repressing them, aligning your life choices, your career, your relationships, your actions with what you've most deeply chosen to value.
And crucially, allowing yourself the necessary freedom to change and grow without losing your dignity or avoiding responsibility for the many choices you've made.
Ultimately, the true self is not a fixed object you finally discover, like finding a historical artifact in the basement. Instead, it is a direction, a way of becoming more real, more awake, and more fully human through continuous integration and conscious, responsible choice.
So you are not defined by who you are right now.
But by the direction in which you are consciously and continuously moving, we encourage you to spend some time considering your own chosen direction this week.
That was a fantastic deep dive into those sources. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. We hope this has given you a clearer, less confusing, and far more actionable view of that age-old instruction. Be yourself. Until next time, keep digging.